Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1:30. We are continuing our May 18th, 2021 Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. At this juncture, we are under item 12, Public Works. 12A is a work session, and we're delighted to be looking at the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan Project Update, PM and NBA 5/21/2019 and 3/10/2020. And we have with us Jared, I'm going to mess up your last name, I apologize. Jared Bowder, Chelsea Hartman, Terry Harding, and Elisa Hansen. Oh my goodness. Elena Domingo, Kate Pearl, John Belcher. However you guys want to proceed, we're all yours.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, commissioners. I just want to make sure you can see the presentation on my screen.
Can.
Okay, I'm having a control panel issue. So, thank you again. And I'm Jared Bowder, the Lane County staff planner for this project and a standing member of the plan's project management team. Also involved on the county side is Lindsay Eichner, principal planner. Here, as you said, from the city of Eugene are Chelsea Hartman, Terry Harding, Alyssa Hansen, and Elena Domingo. Also with us today are the co-chairs of the plan's community advisory committee, those being Kate Purley out of Santa Clara and John Belcher out of River Road. I'd like to highlight at the beginning of our presentation that the development of this plan has been a huge collaborative effort between the city, the county, and the community at large. The Community Advisory Committee and Project Management Team have been undertaking community outreach and have been coordinated on the development of the plan every step of the way. And I'd also like to highlight that this has been a community-driven effort, and the contents of the plan are those items that have risen to the top after vast community outreach efforts. Here's today's agenda. And the purpose of today's work session is to provide an update and check-in on the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood plan and to seek direction to move into the next phase of the project, that being the adoption phase. We're not asking for a decision today and have been providing the board updates at each project milestone in order to keep all stakeholders informed and up to date and to maintain and foster a collaborative process. We requested this work session today to make sure we're on the right track before moving into the next phase of code development. Today, we'll be asking for board direction to initiate the public review and adoption process, including associated comprehensive plan and refinement plan amendments, zone changes, and land use code amendments to support the adoption of the neighborhood plan. We'll start with a project overview, touching on the project phases and outreach. Then we will provide an overview of the neighborhood plan and action plan. And finally, we'll discuss the neighborhood plan adoption package and next steps. The only code amendment proposed to be adopted with the overall plan is the Group 1 urban animal keeping item, the details of which can be found in the attachment B of the packet materials highlighted in blue. And next, Kate will provide us with some background and overview.
Thanks, Jared. So as Jared mentioned, this has been a collaborative effort between the City of Eugene, the Lane County, and our two community organizations, Santa Clara Community Organization and River Road Community Organization, as well as our stakeholder groups, which are a lot of special districts that serve our needs in our two neighborhoods. And this plan is expected to guide growth, development, and change for 2 to 3 decades into the future. So it's been a pretty big deal for us. Our two community organizations spent 2 decades before we even initiated this plan in going out to our neighbors, providing outreach, information, hearing from them what they thought was important, what their best outcomes were for the future, and how they wanted their neighborhood to look and feel. So we've been at this for a very long time. The plan itself was initiated in 2017. So we're pretty confident that the product of our planning effort reflects our community's expectations. The project itself is organized in sort of, if you can visualize it as concentric circles. So in the center, there's this project management team, which involves county staff, city staff, and the 2 co-chairs of our citizen advisory committee. that are made up of John and myself. And we've been meeting every 2 weeks for the last 4 years to work to keep this plan moving forward. Outside of the project management team, we have our citizen advisory committee, and that's made up of 6 residents from Santa Clara and 5 from River Road that are nominated by community organizations and appointed by the Planning Commission. And one of the Santa Clara residents is specifically an outside the UGB resident. So we're making sure that we're paying attention to the needs of our residents that are now and will continue to be outside the UGB, but inside our neighborhood boundaries. We also have 2 alternates for those positions that attend meetings regularly. Outside of that 11-member group, we have our working groups, which are organized by the topic areas, which we'll get to later, but it's approximately 75 residents that have put in hundreds of hours making sure that the different action items reflect community values and closely held priorities throughout the planning process. And then at critical junctures, we've reached out to the general public with some very large public outreach events, primarily at North Eugene High over the last 4 years. And we're just gonna need to figure out what the next iteration of that is as we move into the action planning phase, because we're due for another big public outreach effort. And I don't think Zoom is going to get us where we need to go to make sure everybody's on board. Ding! That's the next slide, ding, Jared. So, as I mentioned, our plan was initiated in the fall of 2017. I'm too old for him. He doesn't know what that means. Our plan was initiated in the fall of 2017. And in the early phases of the plan, we asked our neighbors what they value now and what their hopes and visions were for the future. Our Citizen Advisory Committee and our working group folks took all this information from the public, and we crafted goals and policies to reflect the residents' visions and priorities. In 2019, we came to the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners, and you approved our draft goals and policies as a platform for moving into the action planning phase. So since then, we've been focusing on drafting, evaluating, and prioritizing actions that our neighbors have come up with to implement the policies. This has taken us quite a bit longer. We've had staff changes. This is our 3rd staffing change on the city side, and it's our 2nd staff change on the county side. We've had a global pandemic for a year, and our process has become ever more collaborative as we've moved along. So it's taken us a little longer to work through it, but we're finally prepared to move on to the adoption phase and ramping up outreach so that the adoption of the neighborhood plan can continue, and that'll provide the city and the county direction for how to implement this on into the future. Bing! So our neighborhood plan is divided up into 5 topic areas. On the left in those balls, there's that economic development, transportation, parks and natural resources, land use, and community. And in each of those topic areas, there's a stated vision. And the vision is aspirational and describes the best outcomes for the look, feel, and function of our neighborhood over the next 20 to 30 years. Nestled underneath the vision are the goals, and these are the hopes for the future. They're taken directly from the vision and help refine the ideas a little bit more. Underneath the goals, we have our policies, which are the statements that are adopted and provide a consistent course of action to move us toward the goals. And then underneath the policies, we have a whole separate document called the action plan, and the actions relate back to the policies, and they are the strategies to implement the policies over time. So the action plan is actually its own standalone document. Chelsea, next slide.
Thanks, Kate. Everyone can hear me okay? So like Kate just mentioned, the neighborhood plan sets the policy direction for the city and county, and the action plan is really intended to capture the community identified ideas of possible ways to implement the vision. It's intended to be dynamic and non-regulatory in nature, and really is meant to provide a framework for how we will continue to collaborate to support implementation after adoption of the neighborhood plan. The action plan doesn't determine all of the details now, because a lot of the actions could change in the future upon further review, as priorities evolve, or as circumstances change. And as Kate mentioned, during this project phase, we've been prioritizing actions that are particularly important and impactful to the community. We've also been adding general estimates for budget, timeframe, and feasibility for the actions. And we've been identifying the different project types that are listed here. It's important to note that there are community priorities across all of the topic areas and across all of the different project types, but we will be focusing on the land use code related actions today, since many of those can be implemented as part of the neighborhood plan adoption package. An important outcome of our work is continued plan implementation and collaboration between the community and city, county, and other partner agency staff. Adoption of the neighborhood plan is going to be one major accomplishment, but implementation of the community vision does not end there. Neighborhood plans need continued implementation support after they're adopted. To support implementation of this plan, the city is anticipating shifting toward a planning district approach to support coordination of a variety of our efforts while working towards more equitable outcomes throughout Eugene. This idea is inspired by Eugene's Parks and Recreation System Plan, which uses neighborhood planning districts to conduct geographically based planning that allows for the consideration of the unique characteristics and opportunities of each area. One key implementation tool will be an annual coordination and information sharing meeting between the River Road and Santa Clara community representatives and city and county staff to share work that's been completed, new community priorities, and plan for upcoming efforts. And I'll pass it back to Kate.
Okay, so on the left on this slide, you see the 5 topic areas of our plan. And we also have what we call our action plan highlights. So these are themes or ideas that we've heard over and over from our community that are really important to them, that they want to see happen earlier in the process. And some of these highlights cross topic areas. So in every topic area was mentioned, we want to collaborate to implement it. We want to make sure we're monitoring the outcomes and we're staying on track to achieve the plan's desires. And then the circle outside that with the 6 smaller balls is about themes that weave in and out of all the topic areas. So whether we're talking about transportation or land use or parks and natural resources, there's always been climate concerns and health of the natural world, safety, prosperity, neighborhood identity, equity and inclusion, and connectivity. So those, they run across the different vertical silos of the 5 different topic areas. For the land use actions that are going to require code amendments, staff's recommended that we have phased implementation, and that would be based on community priorities, staff capacity, and available resources. So today what we're asking you to look at are what we call group 1 priorities, and these include actions that staff has recommended be implemented with the adoption of the neighborhood plan. Then we have what we call group 2 actions, which are action items that involve collaborating with related city and county projects. So things that are already in the pipeline or that are scheduled to come in the pipeline in terms of ongoing projects, we have actions that would fit nicely with those already identified ways of implementing. And then we have what we call our group 3 actions, which are remaining code actions that will have to be actualized as processes and resources allow, and they'll need to be initiated and prioritized by decision makers to receive their needed funding and staff resources. So there is the need for a third way for some items that don't seem to fall neatly into the group 1 and group 2 priorities. Many of our priorities that require code amendments are being recommended by staff to be implemented with the plan, but some are still outliers. Ding.
Okay, so the neighborhood plan adoption package will include the neighborhood plan document itself, which is meant to represent the community vision through goals and policies in what will be a formally adopted, legally binding land use plan. It will be supported by the action plan, which is non-regulatory and helps guide implementation. There will also be comprehensive plan, refinement plan, and land use code amendments that implement certain actions to support the community vision. Like Kate mentioned, this includes the group 1 code actions that staff recommend with the adoption package, These will primarily be implemented through the draft special area zone that was developed as part of the River Road Corridor study. Some key themes include a vibrant mixed-use corridor to support 20-minute neighborhoods, transition and compatibility standards, a Willamette Greenway overlay for development adjacent to the river, and increasing opportunities for urban agriculture and animal keeping. Finally, there will be plan designation and zone changes to encourage active neighborhood centers and a variety of housing types. Depending on the extent and location, these changes may require city approval, county approval, or both. For the plan designation and zone changes being considered, they are all within Eugene's urban growth boundary, or UGB, and any proposed zone or code changes outside the city limits but inside the UGB will only occur and become effective over time as property owners choose to annex. City and county decision makers will both be asked to direct staff to prepare the neighborhood plan adoption package, including the policies and land use diagram. However, most of the land use code amendments will only apply within the city limits and require city adoption, while only a few specific code actions would involve county adoption. And as Jared mentioned earlier, those differences are noted in attachment B in your materials, with the specific actions that involve county implementation highlighted in blue. The Group 1 code action that is relevant to the county that we'll be covering today is to apply consistent urban animal keeping standards within the urban growth boundary. And our hope is that we can apply the Eugene code standards to the urban transition area to just provide some clarity and consistency for residents in that area. And some of the key differences would include allowing more chickens, rabbits, and beehives, and a wider variety of animals, as well as increasing rules around sanitation and enclosure setbacks, and adding rules for animal harvesting. And next slide, Jared. Thank you. Okay, so for next steps, we did provide project updates to both the Eugene Planning Commission in March and then the Layton County Planning Commission in April. Both of the commissions expressed general support for the staff recommendations for moving into the adoption phase, preparing the plan adoption package, and phasing the land use code actions. Both commissions also asked to remain involved throughout the adoption phase and emphasized the importance of early outreach. On May 12th last week, we met with Eugene City Council and received direction to begin preparing the neighborhood plan adoption package, including drafting detailed code language for Group 1 code actions so that we can do community outreach as part of the adoption phase. Many counselors also expressed gratitude for the community volunteer efforts. They've been dedicated to this process, and as Kate mentioned, for several years before this, leading up to this work. Once we get clear direction from the elected officials, staff will prepare the adoption package and launch a corresponding phase of outreach. An overview of the adoption phase timeline is shown here. Community outreach will include newsletter updates, virtual input opportunities, involvement of the River Road and Santa Clara community organizations, mail notices, and direct outreach to residents, businesses, and property owners in the area. This input will eventually help inform the community recommendation from the River Road and Santa Clara community organizations, as well as our community advisory committee. This community recommendation would then be forwarded to the Eugene and Lane County Planning Commissions to begin the formal adoption process in winter 2022. And at this point, I'd like to pass it back to Jared.
Thanks, Chelsea. So that concludes our update and check-in. And at this point, I'd like to ask for direction from the board to move into the adoption phase. This will allow the project management team to begin undergoing the next steps of community outreach and stakeholder input, as well as to begin drafting the policies in detail, which we'll be bringing back before this board for policy review in the future. And again, please refer to the blue highlighted items in attachment B for an overview of the county specific actions. And now I would like to open it up for discussion. Thank you.
You would, huh? I'm sorry. Commissioners, this is our opportunity to discuss, ask questions, etc. I see Vice Chair Farr's hand up.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say thanks to Chelsea and to Terry for the time you've spent explaining the details of the handout today, and also the work that went into it. You really added some clarity on for me on my behalf. As far as I'm concerned, you really outlined it very clearly to me. A couple of things I wanted to point out, Chair, is that we're talking about predominantly land use issues and code issues. We don't really go into public safety and some of the other concerns that we know we have in what we call the urban transition. So today I'm not going to talk about really other urban transition issues that involve sheriff response versus EPD response and the other things that go into really what makes up a neighborhood. I think the transition itself, the fact that John and Kate, you guys represent neighborhoods that are mixed between City of Eugene and Lane County residents, people who live, everybody lives inside the urban growth boundary, but not everybody's incorporated. So your neighbors operate under very different standards in terms of services that they receive, not different standards in terms of the urban pressures that people receive from living in a dense urban environment. So that is a part of the longer term discussion. Today we're talking about Group 1, and I'm going to let other commissioners get involved in that a little bit more. But beyond that, you've given us a timeline of how to implement things, and you're asking for board input regarding the action plan. I do have a question, and we've not heard from Mr. Belcher yet, who represents River Road, Santa Clara. As we move through Group 1, what's missing from it, John? I mean, what do we need to make sure that we can focus on in the future beyond what we're focusing on immediately? Things that we aren't necessarily today going to be implementing a plan for, but we cannot forget, we can't take our eye off the ball. Can you fill us in a little bit on that?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Farr. I think there's two categories there. One is that the plan is meant to last for more than the time period of creating the plan. So there's some projects that by their very nature will have to come later. Implementing long-term projects. I think one of the things that's really unique about this plan is it's not just land use and transportation. It involves lots of social aspects, and those will need cooperation between staff in the city and the county and the neighbors as we move forward, and we plan for that. I think Kate mentioned the idea of an annual meeting. Potentially, we'll also have contacts in various departments in city and county. So we'll stay coordinated and be aware of what's going on in the future. There's also a Group 3 set of actions that are land use actions that can't be implemented now for a couple of reasons. First of all, some of them are bigger than our neighborhoods. For example, we have identified the need to look at the Greenway, the Willamette Greenway ordinance, and bring that up to date. We've experienced some challenges with how it's implemented now, but it doesn't just affect our two neighborhoods. So that will require a citywide process, and that'll need to be instigated later in a larger context. And we're hopeful that that will happen. There are a few of the other things in land use that still haven't been resolved because we're still planning them. So it's still a work in progress. Our hope is that at the end of the day, we'll either have everything tied in a nice package with a neat bow, or we'll have a degree of certainty that those things that still need to come forward can come forward. And Kate has her hand up.
John's
Thanks for that, John.
I'm sorry.
I'm still on. Sure.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So I just wanted to point out that what we're asking to move forward today, like you mentioned, Commissioner Farr, are just these Group 1 items. But there are so many other items in the action plan that aren't necessarily code amendments or zone changes that we don't want to take our eyes off of. Over the course of our project, over and over and over again, we've heard agricultural land preservation is a top tier priority for these two neighborhoods. And yes, we've just gone through the urban reserves process, and that's theoretically tied in a bow, but then there's still this issue about what happens at the next time and the next time. And one of the action items in our plan is to talk about the possibility of state legislative change and creating a rural reserve, and so there are action items that are not considered board directed policy or code changes at the moment, but will require your initiative or your support or collaboration over time. And just as a reminder, there are areas of our neighborhood that are within our neighborhood boundaries that are outside the UGB, that at this point are staying outside the UGB, and it's more than a third of our landmass in Santa Clara. Our two neighborhoods together are over 32,000 residents, and over 50% of those residents are unincorporated. So it's not like, I think for some people, they say, oh, well, it's really just a city plan, and we're only just coming to you for a handshake. But that's not actually how we see it. You are an integral part of this plan and such an important collaborative force in helping us achieve the vision for the future for our neighborhoods. And so I just wanted to reiterate that yes, focus on the group 1 priorities, but don't assume that those are in total what we're asking from you.
That is a perfect response, Kate, and consistent with what John and I have been talking about, and you and I have been talking about for quite a number of years now. The critical thing is to understand that this is an area that is in transition regarding annexation. And at some point in the future, who knows how far in the future, it will all be annexed. Today it isn't. Consequently, we have pressures involved. And Chelsea and Terry, as I mentioned to you yesterday, I'm really pleased with what you're bringing forward today. This is a good news plan that you're stepping forward with today, Group 1. It demonstrates to me, to everybody who watches, and to the people who live there, that action is being taken, that people are being listened to very, very closely as to what it is they want for their neighborhood, and you're moving forward with it. So thank you for that. But I do have one last question. And these neighborhoods, you deal with Eugene neighborhoods where everybody lives inside everybody lives inside the city of Eugene. These two neighborhoods, these two neighborhood groups do not have such a luxury. We have people who live inside and people who live outside. The city of Eugene supports communication and outreach to people who live inside the city, but they don't support the outreach to the people outside the city. That is to say, they don't give subsidy for newsletters, for instance, that these organizations wish to provide to people outside the city. They give per household for inside the city, but not for outside. And John or Kate, I guess my question for you is that it's not a question, it's a statement, tell me if it's true. It is an impedance to you carrying forward a complete communication process with everybody in your neighborhoods. Is that a correct statement?
I guess, go ahead, Kate. Okay. Yes, in the past, the city requires this, and we want to put out at least 2 publications a year. And the challenge for us is that the city only covers the residents who are within the city limits. And it's a zero-sum game, because at least in River Road, we've gotten to the point where we don't have enough money to send out newsletters at all. And the city doesn't say we'll send out newsletters to just the residents. They say we have to send them out to all. So as a result, because our funding is insufficient, we used to cover the difference with transition funds that were left over from the sewer wars of the 1990s, but that money has been diminished to the point where we actually cannot send out a newsletter. And Santa Clara is pretty darn close to the same situation. So we're very fortunate as far as the neighborhood planning process is concerned that the city is funding communications on that subject, but all the other subjects no. And once the plan is complete, that funding will go away too.
Thank you, John. Mr. Chair, one last thing then is that this is a great plan that everybody's putting forward with a great deal of deep input. It's only going to be successful if everybody understands it, and everybody in the neighborhood, people who live there inside or outside the city limits, are able to understand the plan and buy into it, so to speak. So I think to me that's an important part of how we move forward, is how do we continue to communicate to everybody in the neighborhoods. Chair Bernie, thank you for giving me a little bit of latitude, and Jared, excuse me, thanks for the presentation. This is a great plan. I'm really, really beyond pleased. I can't even say how pleased I am with the point that we're at right now, particularly in anticipation of the things that John and Kate have talked about, keeping things simmering as we move forward. So thank you very much for this great work. Looking forward to implementing, boots on the ground, getting it done, John. And Kate, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there anyone else that would like to provide input, ask a question? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
As the Santa Clara Commissioner, I just wanted to step in and support a lot of what Vice Chair Farr said. This has been a plan that's been in development for a long time and has gone through some excellent public input. So the plan itself is a great plan, and addresses a lot of really interesting needs, and calls for mixed-use development corridor without a lot of controversy. Because the buy-in the neighborhoods put into that. Think Willamette between down around 28th, when a mixed-use corridor was proposed down there, and the controversy that created. So that's a lot, says a lot for the effort that's gone into the neighborhood associations and the city and all the planning staff to get good input and buy-in from the neighborhoods. I support moving forward the request of staff to get board support for this. I will say probably the only thing the plan doesn't address, but it's really not so much a planning document issue as maybe something that the city council needs to start really thinking about, is there really should be a systematic plan for annexation of these areas. I know that I'll get stones and rocks thrown at me by some residents out there, and having lived there in unincorporated property, I understand this, but eventually, if we are going to execute this plan long-term, these areas really need to be brought inside city limits, where they can get the same level of policing as their neighbors, where they have access to the same level of services. Issues like newsletter subsidies and all that stuff kind of goes away. And really having that planned out in some kind of phased fashion, and maybe with delays in changes in tax rates or something to incentivize the annexation process. Somehow or another, that's the only piece of this plan that isn't being, part of these two neighborhoods isn't being addressed under this plan so much. So, but other than that, everything else, did a great job. And thank you, Kate and John, for your leadership in this.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Mr. Belcher, did I see your hand?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Bosevich, you're absolutely right. And maybe some of those rocks will be thrown at me if I agree with you that we need to talk about annexation. When we approached this plan, we specifically said that we wouldn't talk about annexation as part of this plan, because if we would, it would be the sole topic of discussion. And we wanted to get the plan behind us, A, to complete the plan, and B, to demonstrate the cooperation between the city and the county and the neighborhoods to make that conversation more likely to go in the right direction. So my promise to the council a few years ago, and I think maybe to you guys, is that once we're done with the plan, the next topic of discussion is indeed, what do we do about annexation?
Thank you, Mr. Belcher. Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for this presentation. I first want to just echo the same response you got when you presented to the city, and applaud your just your integrity of process and your commitment as volunteers. As you mentioned, there's been turnover on the staff side, but the volunteers have been the persistent, consistent, steady drivers, and therefore your peers, your neighbors, are more trusting and ready to be part of the process. So that level of broad engagement and inclusivity in your your steadfast leadership is really appreciated as someone who's been a very long time, but as someone who was once involved with neighborhood association here in Eugene, I know what it takes a lot of energy to keep people kind of moving forward and pointed in the same direction. So great work, and thank you for being volunteer leaders. I'm really curious. I have two things that I'm curious to ask about. One is sort of a great pivot from what John was just saying, which is, the difference between sometimes you have to sequence work in a different way than what you've identified as your priorities in order to sort of set the groundwork and make it possible to tackle the priorities. So I'm just wondering, this is sort of more of a philosophical, if you have any observations around that to share what you've learned. And that sort of leads a little bit to my second question, which is like why the urban animal keeping is that coming before us just because that's within our purview, or why that's bumping up to the top? And I'm wondering if that's one of those examples of sequencing to achieve later priorities. Does that make sense as a question?
I think it depends who you're asking. I think Commissioner Trier, could you direct the question, and then
either of our volunteers, although I also see Ms. Hartman with her hand up. So just sort of learning, what the process and what you've learned through it.
Yeah, John or Kate, if you want to tackle it, and I can jump in at the end if that makes sense.
Well, I can frame the question if I may. The oftentimes when you have an issue with a neighbor or a concern, the first question you have to ask is, are they in the city or in the county? Because the rules are different, and frankly, the enforcement is different. So what we're hoping here is to provide as much continuity as possible. And ideally, if the county and the city could agree, the question about whether your neighbor can have a rooster is consistent throughout the neighborhoods.
And I think it also reflects some of the neighborhood priorities around Goal 10 in our plan, which are how do we meet climate crisis goals, carbon sequestration. These two neighborhoods sit on the most fertile soil in the nation. And so how can we support people who want to create a local economy based on food production, even if they're considered urban residents? And one of the things we hear over and over again is, well, we can't collaboratively sell products on our property. We can't, 3 houses in the neighborhood can't all have one farm stand. The code allows every resident to sell their own stuff, but you can't collectively sell on somebody's piece, and you can't have the same number of intensity of animal keeping, which is a large part of people's food source. And so some of the things that come before you are really about trying to even the playing field amongst the residents that are in the neighborhood, trying to create this kind of localized, micro-localized economy for themselves right here. So
great.
In that way, it is a stair-stepped kind of approach to creating the larger vision in the future.
Terrific. I love that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Hartman, did you want to add something before I ask my one other small and simple question?
Yeah, I think I totally echo everything John and Kate said. And I think why some of the things didn't fall into group one is because it would be a bigger code amendment that we couldn't tackle as part of this project. So some of them would be like a citywide code change or a bigger county code change and would need a bigger process. So the urban animal keeping thing is just, I think, one simple way we can provide some consistency for the area residents, and is something we can tackle with this project.
Great, thank you. My other question about I couldn't help hearing chickens and rabbits and beehives, oh my, when you were presenting, but as someone, I live in the friendly neighborhood in Eugene, and we have a tremendous rat problem. And I think a lot of that, we're near the canal, we're near the Amazon slough, so we're near water, you're near the river, but we have a lot of folks with backyard with chickens in particular. And and a lot of folks who compost, and the rats are really attracted to the chicken feed and the waste and so on. So if, as you embark on this, and just if there are any lessons learned from your neighborhood and your group to share with the others around preventative strategies or mitigation, I'm all ears.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there anyone else? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Although my district is quite outside your area in your neighborhood, I have lived both in South River Road as well as in North River Road personally in my life. And I know the tight-knit neighborhood group that you all live in and appreciate the work that you as volunteers have done. I know that volunteers could be doing anything else with their personal time, but committing it to your neighborhood is very commendable. And thank you also for your work and commitment to your neighbors. I'm very supportive of your plan. It looks like you've done a lot of work and a lot of neighborhood outreach already. Please let me know how I can be more helpful.
Yes, Kate, before I speak, Kate.
Sorry, I just had one more thing that was rolling around in the back of my head, and it's a little out of sequence, but I just wanted to circle back to the idea of annexation briefly, and that as a project moving forward from the very start, we knew that our two neighborhoods needed to plan for the future regardless of whether we were incorporated or unincorporated residents. And if we had to come to agreement on being one or the other first, we wouldn't be planning for our future. We would be dithering about for decades before we could begin planning, and we would miss all the opportunities that still lie within our neighborhood boundaries to capture a future that really reflects people's best outcomes. And the way we chose to look at it was that annexation was a tool to implement certain ideas. It wasn't the end goal in itself. So if we want to have commensurate policing in our neighborhood, one way to achieve that would be to use the tool of annexation, right? So that was how we framed the discussion about what people's interests are, what their best outcomes and hopes and visions for the future are, and then detailing different ways to get there. And certainly annexation is a way to get to lots of action items, but it's not the way to get to all the action items in our plan. It's one tool in our toolbox. Just to share that with you.
Well, I would like to say, as the only commissioner that doesn't represent any part of Eugene whatsoever, and I may have lived in Eugene in a past life, but I will never admit it. I think your plan is so cool. I really do. And I think your approach is very cool. And John, I'm trying to place where we know each other from, because I know it's from way long ago. And Kate, your energy is awesome. Really, your energy and heart and passion. I'd like to share that interesting. So the only reason I can't support this is it's because it's in Commissioner Bozovich's district. Otherwise, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry, Jackie. I would like to share that the closest experiences to this type of endeavor I have ironically been in a third world country where the entire microeconomy of the communities was pretty much the heart of what could occur. The country was El Salvador, by the way. And it's so heartening and refreshing to see the kind of citizen guidance with heart and desire for community that's guiding what you do. So I have absolutely nothing to contribute. Let the animals and bees thrive. And I think my sense is that this Board of Commissioners is unanimously and enthusiastically supportive of your plan. Unless a board member wants to contradict that, I think we're good. Is there? Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Just one last thing, and you were wondering when you met John Belcher. John, I can pinpoint the day that one of the earliest days that I met you, about 25 years ago. I complained first that you didn't live in Bethel, And then I appointed you to the Eugene City Planning Commission. So it's been fantastic working with you through these years, John, because you always have had that deliberative look at things. And you served well as a Eugene Planning Commissioner. You brought all of that experience to this table. And really what you know from all of those years is some issues never go away and will be there until the ultimate conclusion, which may be years down the road, such as annexation, but other things that can bring the neighborhood closer together that are lower, easier to attain goals, such as animal standards inside the urban growth boundary. Let's do them, and let's make them get things as uniform as we can. That way people are already working on the same set of rules and standards. And that's one direction that we're going with the Group 1 today, while still understanding there's a whole host of things that are still on the burner. And Commissioner Burney, just a quick note, before the last redistricting, you would have represented all of Third Street.
Well, for those of you presenting, I just want to acknowledge that once again, Commissioner Farr has demonstrated his memory is far better than mine, but he's younger. Is there anything else for either from this group or from commissioners as it relates to this topic?
If I may, we really appreciate your support and frankly, the praise you've heaped on us today. But the reality is we're just the two at the table. There are a lot of people in the neighborhood that have donated much time and effort and knowledge and skill to this. So I'm happy to represent them, but they're part of the game too.
Thank you, John. Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. Do you have what you need from us?
I do, commissioners. Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments and the support.
Thank you very much, Jared. I want to go ding, ding, but my guess is there's no more PowerPoints, so I think we're good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See y'all later.
Thank you.
We are now moving to item 13 on our agenda, Commissioners' Business. 13A, are there any announcements from commissioners? Commissioner Bozovich.
So I just want to make sure the full board's aware. Elizabeth is having full knee replacement surgery tomorrow morning, and I am her sole caregiver. So for the next week, I may be in and out of meetings or listening, not watching. For the general public out there, if I don't answer an email within 15 minutes, that could be why. So just want to let people know that I've got that going on in my personal life that may affect some of my responsiveness as a commissioner. Won't be, immediate response. It may be a couple hours or the next day.
Thank you, Commissioner. And all of our thoughts are with you and Elizabeth. Any other announcements from commissioners? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to let people know that I was invited by Mayor Gowing from Cottage Grove to speak at the recent League of Oregon Cities Symposium on Crisis Management. While simultaneously, our emergency manager, Paige Winningham, was also doing a seminar on updating their emergency manuals for folks all across the state. And I just really wanted to give my appreciation to Mayor Gowing, who is leading up the League of Oregon Cities this year. And it was a great learning experience and fun to be able to answer questions from mayors and other staff members from across the state.
Thank you. Well, Commissioner, other than your state and national appearances, thank you very much. Are there any other announcements? Yes, Commissioner, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair. And on a budgetary note, I served this year as the chair of the Bethel School District Budget Committee, and we concluded our deliberations and passed our budget last Thursday. And Mr. Mokrajewski, I wanted to let you know that the budget process that is used in the county, it really is very, very similar to what the budget process in the school district. I think in no small part because that's what law dictates, and really the process was almost a mirror image of what we do at the county. A little smaller budget, little clearer focus on what needs to be done in some cases, but and therefore easier to pass with the less deliberation. But it was refreshing to know that budget items are handled by different jurisdictions in a very similar fashion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioner announcements? I would like to state this is more of a sharing than an announcement, but because of the decision of another body that I serve on, the Springfield Economic Development Administration Agency, excuse me, which we now have received 2 proposals from developers. Each would invest over $300 million on the 9 acres that CETA owns in the Glenwood area. I don't think CETA, I'm speculating, was quite prepared for this. And so we're going through what the process will be, but it's very, very interesting to see the interplay between local developers, local contractors, local service providers from architects to what have you, and then opportunity zone funds, which are under strict federal guidelines that drive when money is available and when it isn't. So I've already incorporated and coordinating with Austin Ramirez in the event one of these moves through. I expect a decision within about 4 months. I just wanted to share that. Thank you. And I will share that the proposal that both proposals include housing, low affordable housing, hotel complex, etc. So we shall see. Commissioner Trieger, do you have any announcements? If not, I'm going to move forward. Okay, thank you very much. It's item 13B, future board assignment requests. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for our administrator. As more and more rental assistance dollars are rolling out, is that something we might get an update, a standalone update, or might that be rolled into a standing update from H&HS? What's the best way for us to learn more about how that process is going and ask any questions about the rental assistance dollars?
Great question, Chair, Commissioner Trieger. I think, next week you're going to have an update. Are we doing a monthly update on housing and shelter initiatives? So you'll have Sarai Johnson and Steve Manil in front of you. I think that probably is a good place, and I can flag that for Sarai and Steve. Yes, over $40 million, I believe. It may be pushing up to $50 million in rental assistance specifically. We include all the CARES Act funding and then additional funding that's been improved. So I think we could at least touch on some overarching things. And then if you wanted a deeper dive, we could follow up on that.
That would be great. Thank you very much. There were a few questions. We had a little conversation about it during the Human Services Commission meeting yesterday. So I'd love to maybe dig a little deeper and follow up and have this whole body have the opportunity to learn a little more about what we heard at the HSC yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other future board assignment requests? Seeing none, Steve, review of assignments.
So I don't have any assignments. What I'm going to do is follow up with Mr. Manila just to give him a heads up that to be prepared to answer any questions regarding rental assistance next week. Didn't have any assignments. I do have one quick update related to mask guidance that we just received from the state that I thought I would share with you before we end the meeting if you're interested.
Please.
Okay. So we did get the information just at about an hour ago from the state, and we're still reviewing it. What it indicates is that fully vaccinated individuals, they define fully vaccinated as both shots and the period has expired, are able to take their masks off, with the exception, as the governor talked about, healthcare institutions, public transportation, congregate living, correctional facilities. It does then, though, say, I think the most applicable section that I've seen so far talks about all businesses, employers, and faith institutions are required to continue to apply and enforce the mask covering and face shield guidance and physical distancing requirements. So continue to say everyone has to wear a mask unless the employer has a policy for checking for proof of vaccination status of individuals, requests proof of vaccination status from each individual, and reviews each individual's proof of vaccination prior to entry or admission. So that's just a brief summary. There's some more information there, but I would say my initial read is that it's a very, and I've talked to a number of other employers, that's going to be a really challenging and cumbersome process that we're going to have some conversations. Lane County as an employer, what we will do in our workplaces for our employees and for the public, and then certainly from our public health standpoint, how we will assist businesses in reconciling those needs. So I'll forward that all to you if you haven't received it already, but we'll continue to review it. And I will say I have a hard time seeing us change our current policies this week. I think we were hoping that we would get some sort of clarity that would be simple guidance, and this looks like it's rather intensive administration of that regulation. So we're going to need to take some time to develop what our policies and procedures will be.
Thank you very much, Steve. That with news like that, I have to open it up and see if any commissioners want to ask you any question pertaining to that. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. So if I heard right, it sounds like basically what you're saying is businesses can either require masks or proof that you're vaccinated and therefore you don't have to wear your mask, and that they can choose which path they want to take. Am I paraphrasing? Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's a little convoluted because it basically says if you've been vaccinated, you can take your mask off anywhere except for these places. And then it further says, well, hang on, in order to allow people to take their mask off, you as the employer, as the business, has to actually verify. So really the only way to do it is if an employer, one, has a policy and then has a procedure and a way to actually do that. So what happens is then as the employer, you're taking on all the liability, right? And that's not something we've done to date. It's just been, you're either wearing a mask or you're not, right? And that's pretty easy to enforce because it's a really straightforward thing. Now we're going to be in this position. So yes, you can choose. And one choice, I think, it seems, is we could choose to say, we and other employers could choose to say, we're just going to keep our policy the way it is. Everyone wears a mask, and we're not asking whether or not so employers can do that. But if they're going to allow people to remove their masks, employees or the public, you then need to have both a policy and a procedure for doing that. And I'll just say an initial thing that I've been concerned about is, our employees being in the position of having to police the public. And you can just think about all the different front-facing counter things that's a really tough thing. So anyways, you all, I'm glad I had the opportunity at least to share it so you can think about it. And I think before we move too quickly on where we land, I'll definitely take feedback from commissioners and others on the best way to handle that.
Yeah,
but we'll take our time to do it properly.
Yeah, and that was the piece. I was like, is this an employment practice policy or a public facing what the people that we're interacting with? So it sounds a little messy. I will also just say, if we can cast our memories back all then, and also I wasn't in office then, but certainly I was living through the pandemic. It was messy and confusing and chaotic and changed from moment to moment as things ramped up. And then we sort of hit this pandemic groove, if you will. And now it's not that surprising to me that it's chaotic and a little messy and confusing and bouncing around as we kind of unwind either. So just taking that long view and remembering, and eventually and overall, what we're going to get back to is we've gotten on top of this thing and nobody needs to wear masks anywhere. And we're just going to have to go through some bumpy terrain to on that journey to get there. So thanks for the update though.
Anything else on that? It does raise a lot of questions about implementation, liability, enforcement capacity, all of these things when the rubber hits the road. I'm sure you'll revisit it with us when it's not fresh, Stephen. You've had the opportunity to think it through in terms of how it applies here. We are now on item 15. There is no additional executive session this afternoon. Is there any other business before we take recess? Seeing none, commissioners, I remind you we have a 5:30 p.m. Public comment meeting, our monthly evening meeting this evening. And with that, with no further comments, we are at recess.